Hello, thank you guys so much. First, I just want to say a big thank you to the Roblox Developers community for having me here. Already, this has been amazing. You guys are an incredible community. So I'm here to talk to you guys about LiveOps. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. Justin gave me an awesome introduction. But I've been a game developer for a little bit over 16 years, mostly as a game designer and then as a game director. I've worked on a lot of large-scale MMOs, MapleStory, Guild Wars 2, some of the more recent ones. And I've spent my entire career working on live games and thinking about live games. And to me, LiveOps is really the most important thing for developers to be thinking about as we head into the next part of where the game industry is going. And since you guys are the future of game development, I think this is an awesome message. But before we really get into what LiveOps is, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of history. So today, the games industry is very, very large. Earlier today, a lot of people here talked about big numbers. We're sort of used to, at this point, seeing these really large numbers. There are 2 billion gamers in the world today. That's 2 billion people that regularly touch a video game in some way, shape, or form in the world. That's a lot of people playing video games. Last year, the video games industry generated something like $130 billion in revenue. This stuff is really, really big. And if you've been in the industry in the last 5 or 6 years, you might be like, yeah, of course, video games are a really big deal. But this is relatively new for us, actually. We haven't really been a part of mainstream entertainment for very long. Games have been on this journey for the last 30 or 40 years that has brought us to this place. And I think it's worthwhile to think about that journey, how we got here, and where we're going in the future. So it starts with games as product. I'm actually going to ignore the coin-op era for the purpose of this presentation, because the coin-op era sort of is its own thing. It rose and fell. It's very interesting. But it doesn't have a lot to do with the games that we make today. As far as we're concerned as developers, the world really begins with games as a product, or like the console era. So during this era, it was all about these super premium home entertainment experiences. A player would go out and they would buy a really expensive piece of hardware, which was usually a console or a dedicated PC. They would have it at home. They would then have to go get another expensive piece of dedicated software to play. They would set aside a bunch of time. It was really this very sort of bespoke, sort of organized entertainment experience. It was only for a small group of enthusiasts. At the time, we were also very much tied as an industry to the retail world. Because we were making things that were physical products, there had to be somewhere for people to go and actually buy them. So that really meant that we were tied to this whole idea of the retail cycle and the marketing cycle associated with it. It also meant that we were operating a lot like other product-based industries in that there was very little to no communication happening between game creators and game players. I entered the industry at this time, and even though I was making live games in the late 90s, we still only really communicated with our players by receiving handwritten letters in the mail. And we did receive quite a few handwritten letters in the mail, but it didn't make it easy for us to really correspond back and forth. So we were living in this world of games as product, and then the internet happened, which ended up to be kind of a big deal. The internet had kind of been happening since the 70s, but then at the turn of the century, it really happened, and connectivity exploded, and suddenly people were talking to each other incredibly quickly, and information was moving incredibly quickly. And that changed the video game industry. It changed it pretty fundamentally. And we moved out of the games as a product era and into the next era, which we have come to know as the games as a service era. This era ended up being pretty well dominated by mobile and social platforms, mostly because they were the platforms that were in the best position to take advantage of digital distribution, which is really what spurred this era into existence for game development. The idea that you could actually deliver something digitally to someone, they didn't have to go to a store, they didn't have to pick up any kind of physical media, was a big differentiator and a huge change for games. And games are right there. They were ready to take advantage of this new world in a way that a lot of other media wasn't. And so we started to see things like large-scale focus on acquisition. We started talking about the funnel in marketing and how we're going to get people into the funnel and where they were in the funnel. And we started thinking a lot about our relationship with our players directly. And that relationship started to develop at least a little bit. Even if it was just transactional, there started to be a direct relationship between developers and players. And there was a little bit of a community forming online in those early days. We started to see some forums, we started to see some chat rooms and things like that that were dedicated to games, where a few of the game developers and game creators would come and have a little bit of a conversation. If you do follow the games industry, you probably still hear a lot about games as a service. If you're listening to analysts or you're looking at GDC talks, you've probably heard people say, even in the last couple of years, we're finally in the games as a service era, or games as a service is coming. But I think that if you actually look at the industry as a whole, the games as a service area is actually ending. We are actually transitioning out of the games as a service era because we're starting to see the kind of full-scale changes that took us into that era happen again. And they're shifting the way that we think about game development again. And we're moving into a brand new era. There isn't really a lot of consensus in the industry about what we call it, but at Microsoft, we like to call it the games as community era. And the reason we call it that is that this is an era that's going to be defined by games being played not by individual people and not by demographics or some set of statistics, but an actual community of people that has a relationship with each other, that has a relationship with the game, and that talks and changes and grows. This era is going to be, by definition, multi-platform. It is not going to be a situation where we tell players, you have to have this kind of hardware or you don't get in. We're actually going to see this big shift to be where the players are and to deliver things to them wherever they want to be and allow them to take their experiences from one platform to another. We're also going to we're going to continue to see, because it's already really started to happen, a lot of dialogue happening between game creators and game developers. So this is more than just a transactional relationship. This is a real back and forth that's happening. We're starting to have things like Kickstarter. We're having things like early access. We're having things like games like Star Citizen, where their entire roadmap for development is being informed and even voted on by their players. And real dialogue is happening. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's not easy, but we are having that dialogue, and it is a part of making games. This new era is really brought about because the nature of gameplay has fundamentally changed. And this is why we think of it as an entirely new era of game development, is it's not just about consuming entertainment anymore. Games are about competing and chatting and watching streams and creating content and crossing the line, blurring the lines between what it is to be a creator and what it is to be a consumer. And there's people who are playing, they're buying, they're creating, they're doing all of these things. And all of these things are part of game development. It's not just about sitting in a room and coming up with this one piece of content and then putting it out in the world for people to consume. To drive this point home, I like to show this chart. These are the top grossing games worldwide in 2017 and 2018. And what I think is really interesting about this chart is that there is a 90% crossover on this chart. 90% of the games that were in the top 10 in 2017 also in the top 10 in 2018. This would have been absolutely unheard of 15 years ago. 15 years ago, you made a game, you put it out there, basically all your revenue came in the first month. If you were lucky, you had kind of a long tail that lasted a few months later. There's no way you would be sustaining year over year over year, and yet many of these games are many, many years old. And they are continuing to be at the top of this list. And the reason they're doing that is because they have done an amazing job of cultivating a community. What they're actually doing to do that is LiveOps. That's what LiveOps really is. It is the idea of design and process for continual engagement. Not a moment in time, but something that lasts for years. So this term LiveOps, it's been certainly with me my entire career, and it's been around for a while, but we don't always totally agree on exactly what it means. So we'll do a little definition here. LiveOps is two words that we shove together into one, because that's what game developers love to do. The first one is live, and of course that means live game. That doesn't have to mean a multiplayer game or a competitive game. It just means a game that is alive, that can change or has the capacity to change and improve over time. And this side of the word really speaks to the design and engineering of how a game is made. It is made to be changeable. The other side of the word is ops. Of course, that stands for operations. And this brings an element of time into the term. Because to operate something means to take care of it over time. Not just to do something once, not just to deliver something singular, but to take care of it over time, to grow it, to nurture it. This side of the term speaks to kind of processes and mindset and the way that a developer approaches having a live game. When you put them together, you have LiveOps. But it's more than just putting these processes together. And I always like to remind developers that LiveOps isn't just sort of a checklist of things to do in order to have a live game. It's a whole approach to game development. Specifically, LiveOps is a way of thinking about players. We talked about it before, but it's specifically thinking about players as a community. They're a complex group of people. They have a relationship with your game. They have a relationship with each other. And that relationship changes over time based on the things that are happening, based on the things that they want and need. So this is a way, LiveOps is a way of thinking about them as such, as a community, as having a complex relationship with your game and each other, instead of just as singular people or demographics. It's a way of thinking about players and your game's relationship to those players that really emphasizes having your game be a part of their lives, something that they're going to engage with over and over again for years, not just something they're going to consume and then move on to something else. Additionally, LiveOps is also an approach to design. And it's specifically a player-centric approach to design. Games as product are really developer-centric, right? We think a lot when we make a game as a product about what does the developer want, what story do they want to tell, what kind of experiences do they want to concoct and control. And that's awesome. And I think there's always going to be a place in the world for games as product that are really well made. But games that are LiveOps games are really player-centric. When we go to design these games, we instead ask ourselves questions like, what does the player want? How would the player like this to change? How are we going to satisfy this player's intrinsic needs for things like freedom or mastering a skill or making connections and relationships with people? Those are the things that we really focus on when we think about how we're going to design a LiveOps game. Additionally, LiveOps is an experimentation-focused process. If you've heard about LiveOps, you've probably heard about it in relationship to data and analytics, and this is where that comes in. In order to actually operate something well, in order to take care of it over time, we have to be able to change it. It has to be alive, and we have to be able to iterate on it and make it better and improve it. And in order to do that, we have to iterate and we have to do experiments on our game to see what will actually make it better. So we form hypotheses. We say, I think players are going to like A more than they like B. And then we put them out into the world, and we see if that's true. And we use data to do that. We use data to validate our hypothesis. It also is about accepting that even as game creators, we don't always have every answer. We don't always know exactly what the right change to make is or exactly what our players are going to like best. So sometimes we have to experiment. We have to trust our players to go with us on a journey in order to make the game better over time. In order to facilitate this experimentation-focused process, LiveOps games really have to be built in a way that's modular and having all of your features be independent. They have to actually be experimentatable, if that's a word. Basically, what it means is that you can't have systems in your game that if I make one change to this system, if I change one number, 3 other systems are going to fall apart underneath it. And so we think about this as we build LiveOps games and we structure them to make sure that we are capable of doing great iteration and great experimentation on the game after it's live. All of these things about what LiveOps is really comes down to this. When we think about games as a product, we're fundamentally asking questions like, what is the tail of this game? How long will this game last? And we've known for a long time that games that are live, that have some kind of live component, they have a longer tail, they last longer. But that's not what LiveOps is about. LiveOps is about growth. LiveOps is about a game starting small and then getting big, not trying to hang on to the players that you had right at the beginning of the game. When you take care of a game, when you iterate it, when you listen to your community, and you actually tailor the experience for them, you get to have this continual growth over time. The great thing about LiveOps is it's never too late. If you have a live game right now and you're not actively taking care of it, you can start taking care of it. You can start doing operations on it. You can start doing experiments. You can start iterating. You can start making it better and better. We've actually seen a lot of games do this. I've worked with the PlayFab team. They work with a lot of live games. And we see this pattern happen. A game comes out, it does OK, and then the developer decides, you know what? I'm not going to give up on this. I'm actually going to put a bunch of effort into making this game better and better, and then they start to see that growth. So that's kind of what LiveOps is. But whenever I do this talk, I would often get questions from people like, great, awesome, now I'm excited. Let's do LiveOps. I'm all in. Let's go make our games better. But how do I actually do it? Like, what do I actually do in order to do LiveOps? Well, when I thought about that, I thought about all the things that make up games, all these things like design and community and brand and tech. All of those things make up every game, whether they're a LiveOps game or not. So it's not those things. It's something else. It's that plus that LiveOps mindset, the philosophy I was just talking about thinking about your game players as a community, thinking about your design as player-centric, thinking about an experimentation approach. That's what actually happens when you do LiveOps. And it's not just a set of things that you do. It's actually a process. And this is something I've seen repeated over and over and over again. It starts with a live game, right? We have something that's live. Then you layer in the basics, and then you get to optimizing, and then you get to mastering. I'm going to go into what these are exactly. But the point is that it is a process. You have to crawl before you walk. You start with the simple things in LiveOps, and then you do the more complex. You don't have to get it all right out of the gate, which is fundamentally a part of LiveOps, growing and changing and iterating even on your process. And the important thing to know is that absolutely everybody has to do this. Nobody gets to skip these steps. Even when we're talking about companies that have shipped dozens of live games, they still, when they make a new game, have to start all the way over there at 0, get good at the basics, then get good at optimizing, then get good at mastery. And I think that's important to remember, that everybody's going through this journey the same way that you are, even if it's the very first time you've ever done LiveOps. So what are these steps? As I said, we start with a live game, and then we go to step 1, which is to iterate on that game. This is the most fundamental building block for LiveOps. You have to be able to actually make iterative changes to your game in order to improve it, in order to do all of those wonderful things with experimentation that make your game better over time. And the reason you're doing this is, I think something that everyone can relate to as a game developer. After a game is live, you want to improve its performance. You want to extend its life. You want to respond to feedback that your players are giving you. You want to fix bugs, balance things, add new content to the game. All of these things mean that when you're starting on this journey, your first focus should be, how am I going to iterate this game? How am I going to make changes to it quickly and easily based on information that I'm getting from the players, based on behavior I'm seeing? And the things that you're going to need for this are live content teams, and also build, test, and deploy pipelines that can help you actually get things out easily. There's a lot of people who are at this step. It's new studios starting out, like people who are making games for the first time. But there's also a ton of established game studios who've traditionally made games as product, who are right here at step 1 and are dealing with these problems today. And I see that a lot in the work that I do at Microsoft. And the tools that you need to sort of make this step work are things like live event managers, build, test, and deploy pipelines, content configurations, a lot of the things that are really like a modern platform like Roblox is thinking about, and thinking about how they can deliver that to you guys right out of the box. If you can get good at this, if you can get really fantastic at iterating your game, you can make changes to it, and you can respond to feedback, and it doesn't take up all of your effort all the time, you can move on to step 2. You can start personalizing your player's experience. This is all about optimizing. So when you're in step 1, you're making changes, you're iterating on the game. Moving to step 2 is about realizing that every single change is not equal to every single player. That you have players who are having vastly different experiences with your game. A player who's played 2 hours in your game and a player who's played 2,000 hours in your game probably don't want to have the same information when they load into the game. They probably don't care about exactly the same things. And so this is the place where we start to actually personalize that experience for players so that they get the things that they care about. In order to do that, we have to actually understand our players. We have to start really deeply looking at things like player behavior data, segmentation, churn prediction, all of these things that come with deep analysis of data that help us understand who our players are so that we can then turn around and to deliver them the experiences that they most want. This is a tough step to make. It is challenging to get from step 1 to step 2, as it does take a lot of different technology to get there. But if you can get there, there's a lot of big rewards. So the kind of people that are doing this, who are really at step 2, are mid-sized mobile and PC studios mostly. It's been pretty challenging for console games to get very good at this step. Also, some sophisticated publishers are doing this. And most MMOs kind of have to live at this step, where it's very difficult for them to survive. The kind of tools that you're using when you live in this step are targeted offers, churn prediction, recommendation systems. If you can get good at this, you're iterating your game, you're personalizing the experience and making it great for every player, then you can move to step 3. And step 3 is managing your community. So this step is more than just moderating forums or kicking out bad players. When I'm talking about managing your community, I am talking about brand loyalty. I'm talking about organic acquisition, having a game that has such a wonderful community that they go out and pull more people into the game, and that they are an engine for making your game better and making your game last longer and have better engagement. In order to really do this well, you have to have time and energy to really focus on making fantastic social features in your game, on really having fantastic community management, on doing great moderation. To do that, the people who are doing that already are these really big studios, people like Tencent, people like Blizzard. They're doing this right now. They have amazing communities. They have incredible organic growth. You need things like social features like guild systems, UGC, matchmaking. Whenever I give this talk, I have people say, sure, we already have all those things. But do you? I mean, you might have the mechanisms to do it, but are you really using them to your fullest potential? Matchmaking should not be about accurately predicting who's going to win a PvP game. Matchmaking should be about putting the two players who are going to have the best time together in the same space so that they can have a wonderful experience and maybe even make a new friendship. That's when you're really doing the great work that it takes to grow and really manage a community. So all of this really comes to what it takes to do LiveOps. But I'm here from Microsoft, and you may have heard that recently PlayFab and Roblox have announced a partnership together. And PlayFab is owned by Microsoft. We acquired PlayFab a couple of years ago. And so I do want to talk to you guys really briefly about that partnership and what it means for LiveOps. So PlayFab is a company, as I said, that Microsoft acquired about 2 years ago now. And they make a whole set of backend services and tools that enable LiveOps. They're specifically created to help game teams do LiveOps. What that means is they have a whole set of services that they provide to developers. And then those services allow a lot of player activity, a lot of detailed activity like behavioral events and things like that to come back into the PlayFab system. And then we do processing on them. You set rules. You say, I want things to happen when such and such trigger gets hit. And then it pushes back actual changes to the game in real time. That's sort of the core of what PlayFab does. I'm not going to get into it too deeply here, but there's a whole set of services that PlayFab offers, including like player identity, and then all of these things like content and commerce and multiplayer. The partnership between Roblox and PlayFab is an effort to provide some of the PlayFab analytics services to some of you guys, some of the Roblox developers community, so that you can start to experiment and work with analytics in your games using this system that's already well developed. There's actually a cool breakout session today, right after the keynotes, about growing your game with analytics. So if you're interested in this stuff, I really encourage you guys to go to that talk. Also, one of the engineers from PlayFab is here, and he's going to be at that talk as well. So if you have questions, he's going to be there, and you can totally pick his brain and ask him for more details on this. But all in all, PlayFab really is a great tool that unlocks the ability to do all that stuff I was talking about with LiveOps. PlayFab is a big platform. It's scalable. It's global. It has all this stuff going for it. And we're really excited to be partnering with Roblox to bring a segment of that to you guys, because even though PlayFab was acquired by Microsoft a couple of years ago, PlayFab is really committed to being platform agnostic. So, yep, we work on Xbox, of course, and PC, but we also work just as well on PlayStation and Switch, and now also on Roblox, which is very exciting for us to have that platform available to us on our system. So, as I said, check out that talk later today, that breakout session, if you really want to learn more about this. And I think that talk is going to dive into more detail on how exactly to use analytics to drive some of those changes and to grow your game over time. PlayFab is also a bigger part of Microsoft, as I said. There's a bunch of tools and services that Microsoft has that you guys might be interested in. I encourage you guys to check out Microsoft GameStack. It has things like Visual Studio and Power BI and all that fun stuff. But if you just want to learn more about PlayFab, there's some awesome contact information right here. You can always reach out to us. PlayFab is a very developer-centric team. The work that I've done with them has always been super positive. They would love to hear from you. Do not be shy. Just send an email out to that email alias and ask your question or ask for help. They're going to definitely get back to you. OK, thank you guys very much.